Welcome to the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham. In a moment, we're going to bring you a newly circulated episode featuring Hearthstone of the Death Squad. But if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software. I do want to encourage you to check out our other podcasts. Today, I am focusing on the Old Time Radio Snack Wagon. This is great because every week we bring you some really interesting and unique little snack-sized bit of old-time radio. And it can be from a variety of genres. It can be comedy, drama, music. It can be an excerpt of a longer program or a short program from long ago. This season, we've served up a sampler of commercials, featured excerpts from the Family Theater, as well as played episodes of Family Doctor, Unsolved Mysteries, Adventures in Research, and so much more. And we have some great features coming up this month. You can check it out at snackwagon.net. Now let's talk about today's episode, and it does need some context. Now, while this is an episode that features Hearthstone of the Death Squad, it's not actually an episode of a series called Hearthstone of the Death Squad. Now, it's worth noting that the special we played last week was part of the Mole Mystery Theater that aired over NBC. Well, that Mystery Theater program ended in June of 1948, and a new Mystery Theater program began airing over CBS. Frank and Ann Hummert became involved in the production of this new Mystery Theater. Hearthstone of the Death Squad was an original character the Hummerts introduced, and who eventually became the sole focus of the series. And in 1951, Mystery Theater would be renamed Hearthstone of the Death Squad. And indeed, the 3 episodes we played previously were from those 57 episodes that were released in 1951 and 52. This is actually from Mystery Theater, and relatively early in his run. I tend to view Hearthstone as the Hummert's third detective, and I'll talk a little bit about why I view it that way. But here from January 18th, 1949 is the $50 murder case.
And now the Mystery Theater with Hearthstone of the Death Squad, presented by the makers of genuine Bayer aspirin and Phillips Milk of Magnesia tablets.
Welcome to the Mystery Theater, presenting the exploits of the famous Death Squad, implacable manhunters of the Metropolitan Police. Tonight's case is assigned to Inspector Hearthstone of the Death Squad and is entitled The $50 Murder Case, from the original story by Frank Hummert, with Mary Rolfe as Ella Hopkins and James Meighan as Richard Hopkins. And now, Act One of the Mystery Theater, presenting Inspector Hearthstone of the Death Squad in The $50 Murder Case. It is a tense moment in the home of Wilbur Hopkins. For any minute, Wilbur Hopkins' adopted son Richard is expected to return home after 3 years in state's prison for having forged his foster father's name to a series of $50 checks. And as the scene opens, we hear a heated quarrel between Wilbur Hopkins, his own son James, and James' wife Ella.
I tell you, James, again, that bygones are to be bygones. That when Richard comes into this house, it will be as my son.
As your jailbird adopted son, you mean, Father? A convict who threatened to kill you for giving evidence against him at his trial. Are you completely insane, Father?
If loving my adopted son as much as my own flesh and blood is insanity, then I am insane. If carrying out your dead mother's wishes about Richard is insanity, I'm twice insane. So I tell you, Jim...
And I tell you, Father, if you let Richard in this house, he'll wind up by killing you.
James, Father, please don't quarrel about this. Remember, James, this is Father's house. I beg both of you not to quarrel.
Oh, still sweet on Richard, are you, Ella? You remember that you're my wife.
That's Richard now. I know his ring. I'll open the door. Richard, my boy, welcome to your home.
Let's cut all that out. I learned enough in prison not to fall for soft talk. My son, my boy. That's a laugh. After your testimony helped put me behind bars.
All I did, Richard, was identify the checks as forgeries. I didn't say that you forged them.
Well, I didn't forge them. I was framed. And your testimony put me in prison. If it helps you to know it, I'm going back to that prison.
Going back? What for?
For killing whoever framed me and sent me there in the first place.
What did I tell you, Father?
Shut up, James, or I'll smash your face in.
Oh, Richard, please,
Keep
please.
out of this, Ella. You double-crossed me, too.
Please, Richard, please. You know I always...
Loved me? Sure you loved me. Enough to promise to marry me, and then marry James 6 months after I was put in prison. Well, so far as I'm concerned, you can all go to the devil.
Don't talk that way, Richard, my son. Come in here. I want to talk to you.
Dry up your tears, my dear foster father. I'm staying in this house only long enough to pick up my clothes. And then, well, you'll find out soon enough. Goodbye, my dear family. Goodbye.
Later that night, in bathrobe and slippers, preparing for bed, the father, Wilbur Hopkins, suddenly turns as someone appears at his door. He says,
Come in. What do you want? Put down that gun. In the name of heavens, what's wrong with you? Put it down, I tell you. Oh!
Oh! Mr. Hopkins! I heard shots. Shots from Mr. Hopkins' room. Oh, heaven help me. Oh! Mr. Hopkins is dead. Help! Help! Mr. James! Miss Ella! Wake up! Wake up! Your father's been killed. Hurry! Hurry!
What is it, Sarah?
Mr. Hopkins has been murdered. Shot to death. Help! Help!
Call the police, Sarah. Call a doctor. Wake up, Jim. Wake up. Something terrible has happened to your father.
A short time later, a police car shrieks to a stop at the Hopkins home, and a tall, gray-haired man with eyes as cold as steel jumps out and rings the bell.
Oh, the police.
I'm Inspector Hearthstone of the Death Squad, Office of Criminal Investigation. You reported a murder here.
Yes.
Who was killed? Where is the body, and who are you?
My father-in-law, Wilbur Hopkins, was murdered. I'm Ella Hopkins, his daughter-in-law. His body was discovered by our maid here, Sarah.
You are Sarah?
Yes.
You found the body?
I did, sir. And a terrible sight it was. I heard 2 shots. I ran to his room, and there he lay, dead.
Lead me to the body, Sarah. Come along, Sam.
Coming, Inspector Hearthstone.
Right this way, please.
Here's the body.
2 bullets in the heart, Sam.
Whoever did this job was a good shot, Inspector.
Evidently, the murdered man, Wilbur Hopkins, was preparing for bed.
Yeah, fancy bathrobe he was wearing.
See that the photographers get a clear picture of it, Sam. Looks new. Unusual pattern of brocade.
I'll take care of the pictures, Inspector.
And now, Sam, let's talk to the family.
Oh, Inspector Hearthstone, was my father-in-law really shot? I couldn't even look into the room.
Whoever killed him looked into it all right, Mrs. Hopkins. I assume this gentleman is your husband?
Yes, Inspector Hearthstone, I'm James Hopkins. And I warned Ellen, I warned my father.
Against whom?
Against my foster brother, Richard Hopkins. I told my father if he let him in this house, he'd kill him.
Richard Hopkins? You mean the man released from prison yesterday? Was he your foster brother?
Yes. He served 3 years for forging $50 checks in my father's name. Richard never forgave my father for testifying at his trial. He said he'd kill the one responsible for sending him up.
When did your foster brother make that threat?
Before he went to prison and again last evening when he came home, Inspector Hearthstone.
Is Richard home now?
No, we haven't seen him since 11 last night. He came here, he was very nasty, told us all to go to the devil, and packed up some clothes of his and left the house.
He left at 11 last night. Did you hear any disturbance after that?
No, I went to sleep shortly after 11. I didn't wake up until my wife called me and said something terrible had happened to my father.
And you, Mrs. Hopkins?
I slept soundly. I didn't hear a thing until the maid Sarah heard the shots and called me. I told her to call the police.
I see. Now, tell me, Jim Hopkins, what places did your foster brother Richard frequent before he went to prison?
Well, the Pen and Brush Club, Inspector Hearthstone. That's a rendezvous for artists. Richard was a commercial artist.
And so are you.
Yes. How did you know?
I've seen your name on a number of illustrations in magazines. Any other places Richard frequented?
The Blue Owl Tavern on 10th Avenue. That was his real hangout. He cashed his forged checks there.
Jim, Richard wouldn't go back to that place. I'm sure Richard didn't murder your father. Jim, I don't care what you say.
Well, I might expect that from you, Ella. I thought you'd rush to Richard's defense.
You seem extraordinarily fond of Richard, Mrs. Hopkins. What's the connection between you?
Connection? There isn't any.
Better tell me the truth about this thing. It's better for everybody.
I was in love with Richard. Engaged to marry him.
But while he was in prison, you married Jim here.
Yes, I did.
A quick change of affection. Tell me, why did you marry Jim?
I was Wilbur Hopkins' ward. He was my father's best friend. After Richard went to prison, he persuaded me to marry Jim. He said he wanted to keep me in the family.
And no doubt to make you legally an heir to his estate.
What do you mean? My father-in-law never said anything about that to me.
Now, Jim Hopkins, your father was a fairly rich man. Tell me, who stands to inherit his estate?
I have no idea, but this isn't a murder for money, Inspector Hearthstone. My foster brother Richard practically told my father last night that he was going to kill him.
But the question is, did he?
Of course he did, and if you ever find him, you'll know that I'm right.
I understand your theory perfectly, Jim Hopkins. You think your foster brother Richard killed your father because he testified against him at his trial.
That's it exactly, Inspector.
Then I put it to you that your father's testimony wasn't the major factor in Richard's conviction.
What?
I remember the trial very clearly. The testimony that had actually sent your foster brother Richard up was given by a man named Galupus, a tavern keeper who cashed the forged checks.
Oh, yes. I'd forgotten all about Galupus.
Isn't that wonderful, Jim? I told you Richard didn't do it, and now Inspector Hearthstone says he didn't.
Let me correct you, Ella. I didn't say he did or he didn't. Detective Cook and I are now going to see this man Galupus at the Blue Owl Tavern on 10th Avenue. And I have a hunch we'll find Richard Hopkins there.
This tavern of Galopus is about as low as they come, Inspector Hearthstone.
Yeah, Sam. Sordid hangout for criminals. In fact, I see some of our old friends. There's Lefty Louie over there, sitting with Legs McCoy. Look, Sam, in that booth in the corner. That's the young man we're looking for, Richard Hopkins. Come on.
Right behind you, Inspector.
Richard Hopkins?
Yes, I'm Hopkins.
I'm Inspector Hearthstone of the Death Squad, and this is Detective Cook.
What do you want now? Aren't you cops done with me yet?
Hardly. You see, we're investigating the murder of your foster father, Wilbur Hopkins.
Father? Murdered?
Yes, and we have every reason to believe you killed him, Richard Hopkins.
No, I didn't. I was right here all the time.
You were here all night? Why?
I came here because I was framed when I was sent to prison, and because Galupus had something to do with it. Great Scott, I couldn't kill Father.
Others say different.
Listen, Inspector. Galupus testified I cashed one of those forged checks in this tavern. But I'd never been in this tavern, and I never saw Galupus before the trial.
And I say the question is, did you kill your foster father for revenge and then come here to do the same thing to Galupus?
No, Inspector Hearthstone. Listen, when I was in jail, I talked to the other prisoners. They told me that Galupus was a great front for a frame-up.
Yes.
So last night, after I left Father's house, I came here. I wanted to get a line on Galupus, find out how I was framed.
I never heard a crook yet who didn't claim he was framed.
Believe me or not, but I swear I didn't even know my father was murdered until you just told me. I've been here all the time. Oh, what's the use? I might have known you cops wouldn't believe me.
Sam, bring Galupus over here.
Right, Inspector Hearthstone.
Richard, you threatened to kill your foster father, Wilbur Hopkins.
I was sore. He testified at my trial. Those $50 forged checks were on his bank. I lost my head when I threatened Father, but I didn't mean what I said.
There's Galopus, Inspector Hearthstone.
Look, I'm no one trouble with the cops.
I only want you to answer one question, Galupus. Was this man in your tavern all night?
This young fella, I've noticed him, is Richard Hopkins.
Tell him you saw me here, Galupus.
I'm sorry, he's not been near the place all night. The first time I see him is when he come in half an hour ago.
He's lying.
Get your coat, Richard. You're coming back to your father's house with me.
But he's lying, Inspector. Galupus is lying.
Get your coat and don't try anything. We've got you covered. All right, Galupus, you can go.
Thank you, Inspector Hearthstone.
Sam, take this menu I picked up and put it in a safe place. You'll notice it's got a drawing on it. A drawing of a pretty girl in evening dress on a sofa.
He's artist, so he's sketching.
Look at the evening dress, Sam. The full skirt is patterned, and with the same pattern as that on the brocaded bathrobe Wilbur Hopkins was wearing when he was murdered.
And this sketch practically convicts Richard.
If we can prove that he drew it, it will, Sam. All right, now. Go into the living room, Richard.
I didn't kill Father. Inspector Hearthstone, Galupus was lying, I tell you.
Move on, Richard. The rest of the family's in that room, and I want them to see you.
All right. Then put that gun away, Detective Cook.
Oh, Inspector Hearthstone. This is my Aunt Marion with us.
Well, Jim, Ella, and Aunt Marion, what are you doing with that desk? Why are you breaking it open?
It's Ella. She remembered that the desk has a secret drawer. Father said if anything ever happened to him, we were to open it.
We looked for you, Inspector. We wanted you to be here.
Really?
Well, I see you've got him. You've got Richard.
And you're glad of it, aren't you, Jim?
You're darn right. I could put on the juice myself, you dirty
Jim!
undrink.
Stop talking to Richard that way.
You stay out of this, Aunt Marion.
Just a minute. I assume you have no key to this desk you're trying to break open. Where is the secret drawer supposed to be?
Under here.
Does anyone object if I break it open?
No, Inspector Hearthstone.
All right, Sam. Let's see what we can do.
Right. I'll get at it from down here, Inspector.
Yes, got it, Sam.
Hey, and get your hand in.
What's inside, Inspector Hearthstone?
An envelope, Ella.
Open it.
I am, Jim. Well, this is interesting.
What is it, Inspector Hearthstone?
Miss Marion, this paper is the last will and testament of Wilbur Hopkins. Extraordinary that Ella knew just where to look for it.
Inspector Hearthstone.
You remember I suggested to you before that this marriage might result in your being an heir to the estate of the murdered man?
How horrible.
I'll read this will. I, Wilbur Hopkins, being of sound mind, do bequeath 3/4 of my estate to my own son, James Hopkins, and the remaining quarter to James' wife, Ella Hopkins.
Well, that can't be right.
To my adopted son, Richard, I leave the sum of $50 in the hope that this $50 inheritance will remind him always of the $50 checks he forged in my name and will lead him toward a decent, honest life.
Oh, but that's impossible. My brother Wilbur always said his estate was to be divided equally between his two sons, Jim and Richard.
Did he, Miss Hopkins?
Well, Wilbur always told me that no matter what Richard had done when he came out of prison, bygones were to be bygones. He said Richard was going to get as much as Jim.
He never told you he changed his mind, Miss Marion?
I don't remember, Inspector Hearthstone. Perhaps he did change his mind.
Sure he did. Father turned against me like the rest of you.
And that's why you killed Father, Richard.
Don't, Jim, don't.
Perhaps you killed him, Jim. You and Ella. You'll get nearly $100,000 by that will.
Richard, how can you say such a thing about Jim, about me?
In my position, Ella, I can't trust anybody, not even you.
That is an astute observation, Richard.
What do you mean, Inspector Hearthstone?
You, Jim Hopkins, and all of you are under suspicion of murder. And don't believe for one moment that you're not.
This is Jeffrey Barnes again. In just a moment, Act 2 of Mystery Theater. Now a word from Dan Seymour.
When you're out for the evening and acid indigestion threatens to spoil your fun, it's mighty comforting to know that there's a box of Phillips Milk of Magnesia tablets in your pocket or handbag, there to give you on-the-spot relief whenever you need it. You just take Phillips tablets and feel like a new person almost instantly. And the reason for this is that each Phillips tablet contains the equivalent of 1 teaspoonful of the liquid Phillips, which is one of the fastest neutralizers of excess stomach acidity known. So wherever you go, carry Phillips tablets with you at all times for on-the-spot relief. They're peppermint flavored and easy to take with or without water. Genuine Phillips tablets cost only 25 cents for the pocket-sized box of 30 and are also available in the economical family size of 200 tablets. Tomorrow, get Phillips Milk of Magnesia tablets.
Now this is Jeffrey Barnes returning you to the Mystery Theater and Act 2 of Hearthstone of the Death Squad in The $50 Murder Case. The discovery of the murdered Wilbur Hopkins' will, leaving his estate to his son Jim and Jim's wife Ella, and leaving $50 to his adopted son Richard, the convicted forger, has set Inspector Hearthstone on a new trail. We find him in Wilbur Hopkins' study, saying to Detective Sam Cook,
There's something fishy about this will, Sam. Every instinct tells me so.
Fishy, how do you mean, Inspector Hearthstone?
I think it's forged.
Well, why should Richard Hopkins forge a will that cuts him off with $50?
Yeah, it could be to throw suspicion of his father's murder off him and onto somebody else, but... Easy now, Sam. Here comes Richard. While I talk to him, you go upstairs and get what I told you to get.
Okay, Inspector.
What do you think you're doing, Inspector Hearthstone?
Hello, Richard. Come in.
Oh, making a copy of the will.
Exactly, Richard. Wills have been forged, you know.
Forged? What do you mean?
I mean that I'm testing every typewriter in this house to see which one, if any, was used to type your foster father's will.
Inspector Hearthstone, do you mean Jim and Ella may have forged the will and then killed Father for the money? That you're not sure I did it?
It's possible you forged it to throw suspicion on Jim and Ella. Once a forger, always a forger. Very interesting. This typewriter is not the one that wrote the will.
I found another portable typewriter upstairs, Inspector Hearthstone.
Put it on the table, Sam. Well, who's this following you? Jim and Ella.
What's the idea of all this, Inspector Hearthstone?
Yes, what do you want with my typewriter?
Oh, it's your typewriter, Ella. I'll just put a sheet of paper in and see how it works.
What are you doing?
Testing, Jim. Testing.
I'll do without your opinions, Richard.
Oh, I can't stand it. I can't stand it. All these suspicions.
Was it her typewriter, Inspector Hearthstone? Was the will typed on Ella's machine?
No, Richard, it was not.
You see, Inspector Hearthstone, that's what comes of your ridiculous suspicions. Nothing.
I disagree, Jim Hopkins. It's significant that none of the machines in this house was used to type Wilbur Hopkins' will. If he wrote it himself, where would he have typed it but in his own house? I'll take that phone. Hello?
Hello, Inspector Hearthstone.
Yes?
This is Marion Hopkins. I have something very important to tell you. I can't tell you over the phone.
Is it about the will, Miss Hopkins?
I'd rather not say on the phone. I must see you.
All right, I'll be right over.
No, I'm not home. Come in 2 hours.
Very well. It's 2:00 now. I'll see you at 4.
Thank you, Inspector. This thing gets more and more horrible, more and more. You mustn't fail me, Inspector. You mustn't fail me.
Right on time, Inspector Hearthstone. 4:00.
Yes. Why the devil doesn't Aunt Marion Hopkins answer her doorbell? I'll try the knob. The door's locked. Use your keys, Sam, quick. I'm afraid she's kept a previous appointment.
Previous appointment?
A previous appointment with murder. Yes, there's her body. Marion Hopkins is dead, Sam. Shot.
Her body's still warm, Inspector.
She was going to tell us something about that will.
Who killed her?
It could have been anyone, Sam. All of them. Ella, Jim, Richard. They all knew she had something to tell me about the will. They were all there when Marion Hopkins phoned, and they heard me mention the will to her.
That's right, I remember.
Sam, there's one typewriter we haven't tested yet. The typewriter over in the corner in Galupa's Tavern. I saw it when I was there. I want to test that typewriter, Sam, but I want to test it in a hurry, because this killer will strike again. Sam, here's Galupa's Tavern. Now for that typewriter.
Over there, Inspector Hearthstone.
Oh, Inspector Hearthstone, you want something again, huh?
I just want to use your typewriter, Galupas.
Here's a sheet of paper, Inspector.
My typewriter? What do you want to do that for? Hey, you cannot do this to me. I run a respectable place. Leave my typewriter alone.
Stand back, Galupas. Inspector Hearthstone will do what he wants.
Cops or no cops, you gotta ask me when you want to do something around here. You stop now.
In a minute, Galupas.
How come you use my typewriter? I don't want to get mixed up with anything. I don't want trouble.
There's our sample of type, Sam.
Give me that paper. Give it to me.
Quiet. Galupas, I put it to you. This typewriter of yours was used in typing a forged will of Wilbur Hopkins.
I don't understand. What will?
The will of Wilbur Hopkins, who was murdered 2 nights ago. What part did you have in that murder, Galupas?
I know nothing about a murder. I know nothing about any will.
The will was typed on your machine.
Anyone can come in and use the typewriter. You see it's out on the table here in the open. I don't watch closely. I don't want trouble.
You watched us closely, Galupas. A man of Wilbur Hopkins' standing wouldn't come to this den of criminals to type his last will and testament.
I tell you, Mr. Copper, I know nothing about it.
And I tell you, Galupas, Jim Hopkins made no mistake telling me to look you up.
Jim Hopkins tell you to look me up? He's a liar if he said I had anything to do with this.
You'd be surprised to know what else he told me, Galupas. Things look pretty bad for you. Pretty bad indeed. Sam, take Galupas' typewriter. It's evidence. Come on, let's go.
Check.
Inspector Hearthstone, listen. Listen!
Boy, what a noisy Greek. Well, it looks like Wilbur Hopkins' jailbird son Richard typed and forged that will right in Galupus's tavern, Inspector.
Maybe, Sam. Surround the Hopkins house with a cordon of men.
Cordon of men, okay.
We're going to watch that house tonight, Sam. I think the murderer will strike again.
This is Jeffrey Barnes again. In just a moment, we return you to Hearthstone of the Death Squad in the $50 murder case.
There's no need to let an ordinary headache upset you and spoil your whole day. To get relief that's so fast you'll be amazed, take genuine Bayer aspirin. Bayer aspirin works quickly because it starts to disintegrate within 2 seconds after you take it. To see this astonishing speed, drop a Bayer aspirin tablet in a glass of water and watch what happens. Before it reaches the bottom of the glass, it begins to disintegrate. That's exactly what it does in your stomach. It's actually ready to go to work almost instantly. And remember, besides fast relief, Bayer aspirin also offers dependable relief. No other pain reliever can match its record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. When you buy, ask for it by name. Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece.
Now, this is Jeffrey Barnes returning you to Act 3 of the Mystery Theater, presenting Hearthstone of the Death Squad in the $50 murder case. Inspector Hearthstone, implacably on the trail of the double killer of Wilbur Hopkins and his sister Meighan, has discovered that Hopkins' will was forged, typed in the tavern run by the Greek Galupus. Now Inspector Hearthstone and Detective Sam Cook are hidden in the dark hallway of the Hopkins house. It is the middle of the night. They wait and watch.
It's 3 o'clock, Inspector Hearthstone. You think anything will break?
I know it. The murderer's on the prowl tonight, Sam.
It's as black as pitch.
The murderer! Sam, put on your flashlight. This way, Sam.
Help! It's Jim Hopkins. Somebody's trying to kill him.
Stay where you are, Galupus.
Galupus.
Don't move.
What happened? Those shots?
Inspector Hearthstone, you saved my life. That Greek Galupus, he tried to kill me.
You're under arrest, Galupus, for the attempted murder of James Hopkins.
I'll kill you with my bare hands, Jim Hopkins. You put these cups on me, you...
Pull him off. He's killing
Lay
me.
off, Galupus, or I'll crack your head open with this gun.
I'll kill you for this, Jim Hopkins, trying to put it up on me for killing your old man. He's the one who killed Wilbur Hopkins, Inspector Hearthstone.
Shut up, you fool. The cops have tricked you.
You squealer. Nobody tricked me. I tell you, Hearthstone, this Jim Hopkins typed that phony will on the typewriter in my restaurant.
Shut up, Galupus. What are you trying to do? Put us both on the chair?
Nobody's putting me in the chair for what you done.
Right you are, Galupus. You'll get off easy for telling the truth.
What are you talking about, Hearthstone? This man just tried to murder me.
James Hopkins, I arrest you for the murders of your father and of your Aunt Marion Hopkins.
Huh? You're crazy, Hearthstone.
I'm not and you're not, Jim Hopkins. You murdered your father and tried to put the crime on your foster brother, Richard, the day he was released from prison for a crime he never committed.
That's a lie.
You're the one who planted those forged checks on your brother and then bribed Galupus here to testify your brother passed them.
That's right, Inspector Hearthstone. Then the dirty squealer tried to pin murder on me.
And then, Jim Hopkins, you forged a will, leaving all your father's money to you and your wife, Ella.
I had nothing to do with that, Inspector Hearthstone. I swear I didn't.
That's all right, Ella. He did it to get more money for a girl he was infatuated with, a girl he used as a model.
I got the girl's sworn statement here, Inspector.
Jim, how could you murder your own father?
And then when he heard his Aunt Marion phone me, he got the idea she might have his father's real will, so he murdered her.
Try to prove that, Hearthstone.
Here's the real will, Jim Hopkins. Your aunt left a scribbled note in her room giving the name of her lawyer, who was holding your father's will in safekeeping.
No!
Drop that gun, Hopkins, or I'll drill you.
The real will leaves all Wilbur Hopkins' money to his 2 beloved sons. To James, my own son, and Richard, my adopted son, in equal parts.
That's not evidence of murder, Hearthstone.
Sam, give me that sketch. Look at it, Jim Hopkins. No. You drew it.
No, take it away from me.
No. You dropped it in Galupus Tavern. The pattern in the girl's skirt in the picture is the same as the pattern on your father's bathrobe the night you murdered him. You drew this unconsciously. not knowing where it would lead you.
That's right. I, Galupus, saw him draw it myself, scribbling like all them artists do.
You're a murderer, Jim Hopkins, and I have the evidence to put you in the death chamber.
All right, I confess. I confess to everything. Just stop pounding at me, Hearthstone.
Take him away, Sam.
Come along, you two. Don't try anything on me.
To think I was married to a murderer. Inspector Hearthstone,
You'll find another life, a happier one, Ella. And I think it will be with the adopted son, who was good. And you'll soon forget the real son, who was bad.
And thus, Inspector Hearthstone ends the $50 murder case. Writes, solved across the index card at police headquarters. The part of Inspector Hearthstone was played by Alfred Shirley. This is Jeffrey Barnes inviting you to listen again next Tuesday night at this same time when the Mystery Theater presents The Meat Market Murder Case.
If you suffer from dandruff, remember this. It's just a waste of time and money to fight it by using preparations that merely remove loose dandruff. Even plain water and brushing will do that. To get real relief, you must destroy the germ Pityrosporum ovale, which many authorities say causes the most common kind of dandruff. A remarkable preparation called double danderine kills this germ on contact. Even in some of the most stubborn cases, results with double danderine have been amazing. So for real relief, try double danderine.
This is Dan Seymour saying goodnight until next Tuesday night at this same time, when the Mystery Theater will present The Meat Market Murder Case.
This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Welcome back. So our killer decided to substitute a fake will without having any control or knowledge of where the real will was held, and the real will was actually with the decedent's lawyer. Okay, that's about par for the course for Hummert villains. Now, it's worth noting that James Meighan appeared in this episode, and he starred in The Falcon for 2 years and appears in the first 2 circulating episodes we were able to play. However, he was far better known as someone who worked in the soap operas and most of the crime dramas he was known for, such as Alias Jimmy Valentine, were in conjunction with the Hummert. So hearing him in a Hummert production is not a surprise. It was kind of weird to have more than just the lead credited on a Hummert show, but that may go back to this having that sort of mystery theater format working for it. Now, I said I would talk about where I place Hearthstone, who is played by Albert Shirley. Albert Shirley, by the way, and I'm saying some of this stuff because it's been such a long time since we've played Hearthstone of the Death Squad. But Alfred Shirley is best remembered for playing Dr. Watson in the 1947 to 48 series of The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with John Stanley as Holmes. But in his time was just a mainstay of the New York radio acting community. He had been acting in radio since 1925. So once again, you have the Hummert's connections and their ability to bring in quality people paying off. I think that Hearthstone was the third detective Although I think it's pretty close between Hearthstone and Chameleon. Of course, Mr. Keen had been around since the 30s. Mr. Chameleon premiered on July 21st of 1948. The Mystery Theater series came over to CBS on June 29th of 1948. And Hearthstone was a feature that was introduced that kind of took over the whole series, but we don't actually have any indication as to which episode he was introduced in for sure. The old Digital Deli website had a log of all of the Mystery Theater episode titles, as well as information from the Wisconsin State Journal listing information about all the episodes. None of these reference Hearthstone in the early episodes. One strong candidate for a first appearance for Hearthstone would be the 12th episode of the series, The Clock Strikes Murder Case, as that fits with the sort of naming convention that the Hummerts would tend to use on their detective programs, although not universally. You could probably, if you found in episodes like Death and the Weeping Bride, Murder in the Family, or The Garden of Death, Murder, those could all be plausible enough introductions for Hearthstone based on the title, which might mean he premiered as early as August 24th. I probably wouldn't date his first appearance any time before that. Newsstand Maggie, which the Wisconsin State Journal described as a tale of lust for revenge, sounds more like a standard mystery program. The Squealer actually which was the program previous to that on August 10th, actually adapted a story by Edgar Wallace. So Hearthstone premiered a month or two after Chameleon, and probably in about 15 months was airing nearly every week. And so there was a period where the Hummerts were producing 3 different detective programs that were all on the air at the same time for CBS. But that's all we have for Hearthstone for now. The next time we return to the worlds of Anne and Frank Hummert, it will be to bring you Mr. Chameleon. All right, well, now it's time to thank our Patreon supporter of the day, and I want to go ahead and thank Mick. Mick's been one of our Patreon supporters since June of 2015, currently supporting the podcast at the Shamus level of $4 or more per month. Thanks so much for your support, Mick. And that will actually do it for today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software. And if you are enjoying the podcast, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and mark the notification bell. All those great things that help YouTube channels to grow. We will be back next Tuesday with Operation Danger. But join us back here tomorrow for Broadway's My Beat, where
Owen found him and called me.
I'd like to talk with Fred Owen, Father.
Of course. Sister.
I'm afraid that's impossible, Father. Fred must have gone home for the day. This finding Jimmy dead by a knife, it undoubtedly made him ill. Fred is a very sensitive boy.
Shirley, did Jimmy have any visitors?
Why, yes, I have them here, Mr. Clover, a list. I called to tell them of Jimmy.
If you don't mind, sister.
Yes, here. I don't understand.
Routine, sister, simply to complete a file.
Is that all, Mr. Clover?
A few more things. I'll want the attendant's address.
Of course.
And a question. Could anyone at all, attendant, visitors, anybody, could someone have come in here and murdered Jimmy?
What do you say?
Please.
Yes. It could have been done, Mr. Clover. What are you getting at?
Jimmy was stabbed in the side too close to his back to make him a suicide. Jimmy was murdered. You can say rights now, Father.
I hope you'll be with us then. In the meantime, send your comments to box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives and check us out on Instagram. Instagram.com/greatdetectives from Boise, Idaho. This is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.